All right, another episode of the Stratford Warriors Report. I'm your host, Les Vaders. Got a great show for you tonight. I've invited Jeff Buhrow, the Urban Barber, to come and co-host this one, as it's going to be a big show. I usually have all the fancy banners and that, but everybody was sick in the house today. Kids over, grandkids over as well. Didn't get a chance to do it all, but we'll get right to it. Let's bring Jeff Buhrow on. Jeff, how you doing on this cold winter day in Stratford?
Oh, I'm good. Hence the Kenora dinner jacket I'm wearing.
It's freezing out there.
It is. It's nasty, but good to be here. And really, thank you for the invite for this great opportunity tonight with our guest. And looking forward to it.
Let's talk about what happened the last 3 games. Stratford with a big 3-game weekend. They got the 1 win yesterday in a shootout, but Thursday night, Jeff, they went up to St. Mary's and they took it to St. Mary's in the first period. But it was the Lincoln Moore show up in St. Mary's Thursday night.
Yeah, you really tell with a player like Lincoln Moore how big of a individual he is in this league. And I did make the drive out to St. Mary's that night, and couldn't agree with you more. Stratford got off to a really good start, and you kind of saw the rest.
Yeah. Even St. Mary's coach Jeff Bradley said after the game, he said that's a game they really didn't deserve to win. The score did not reflect the play Stratford took to St. Mary's through most of that game. I think the start of the second period, St. Mary's come out a little better than they did in the first.
Yeah, and I think too, if you talk to a few people who follow the Lincolns, they're pretty famous right now. Not in a great way, but pretty famous for slow starts. They catch their stride halfway through the first, going into the second. That happened with the Cambridge game I was at, and they're a really great team in this league. And Stratford, I don't know if there was a little something missing after the first period with Stratford. They're still getting chances, but I think it just comes down to a lot of luck, and it went St. Mary's way that night, but. It is what it is.
Yeah. Stratford lost Colin Slattery in that game on a high hit. He did not play anymore on the weekend. So Stratford lost 4-2 that night. It was a quick bus ride home. The roads were pretty good. The next night, Friday night, London came to town, and the boys were ready to go, but it sure didn't reflect on their play. It was a slow start. They got down quickly, and London really just pounded it to them. London really wanted that game in Stratford. I'm not sure what was going on there. They just couldn't handle Austin Pomerleau, his speed coming into the zone a couple times, and a lot of their other big guys were also scoring there. So they lost that game 5-1. So that was a tough loss. They had Saturday off, and then on Sunday, the alumni game, the big battle of Perth County. It was also a GOHL spotlight game with 519 there and the spotlight on them against the Listowel Cyclones, and that's always a big game. It doesn't matter where these two teams are in the standings, and they play like that. And it was an exciting game from start to finish. Went to a shootout. Luke Menard scores in the shootout. Same goal I saw him score early in the year against Chatham. Stratford gets the 3-2 win. Get 1 out of 2 on the weekend. Now you got 2 games left before the Christmas break. Friday's going to be a measuring stick game, I think, with Elmira coming to town, Jeff.
For sure, and I think it just is an example, and we talk about it time and time again in this Western Conference, especially just the parity and the teams that come out any given night. Any team can win, and I think that it always rings true for me with a guy like Clarkey who says you want to go 50-50 or better on your weekends. Stratford's already back on the right track. They won on Sunday. The last 2 games previous to that weren't ideal. But with that being said, they've got the steam going again. And, Elmira, they're going to be up for the game. And they know that Elmira is going to come in hungry. And, they've been having a great year so far. So Stratford's just got to be ready, do their thing. Biggest thing that I would say for that game, especially against a team like Elmira, is they need to really capitalize on their opportunities. They get lots of shots. So let's see what they can do and really put that puck in the net and create opportunities for themselves, because it's going to serve them well if they can do that for themselves.
Yeah, Elmira is a team that scores a ton of goals. That's one of the issues a lot of people have talked to me about. I've noticed it on the broadcast. The general that I've talked about on the broadcast, Stratford's having a hard time getting the puck in the back net. They're out shooting their team. They're out shooting every team, every game lately, but they just can't get that puck bounce in back the net. Also on Sunday, Quinn Kiffer played for North Bay in St. Catharines Sunday afternoon, so he was a loss for the team. Grady Murphy checked back in. We'll see what kind of lineup we have come Friday and Saturday. The last game, Saturday, we travel to Strathroy, and that should be another tough game as Strathroy is down there battling for the 8th, 9th spot. And so they don't want to give up. There's no easy points in this Western Conference, Jeff.
No, for sure. And with that being said, too, I just wanted to ask: is there any update on Slattery's condition?
No, there's no update yet. Still an upper body. Jack McGurn left the game on Sunday. Same type of hit, and he left the game with an upper body. So we're gonna have to see where that goes as well.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean,
tough.
Yeah, and you're saying about the Strathroy game, and that's a team that's down closer to the lower part of the division. But make no mistake, and you say it a lot, and it's the truth is, you can't take any nights off. You got to get a good start. You got to get you got to get going.
Yeah, they play out of the Western Middlesex Center, which has the oddest ice surface in the league. The corners are a lot square. The glass is short. It's the smallest rink in the league.
Older arena must be.
It's an older arena. They've done some work. They put a bar in on the one end, but it doesn't even have seats in it. They're just benches all along the sides. Okay. We broadcast the game from the far end, and it's a chilly rink. It's one of those rinks.
All right. A little signature junior hockey, right?
Yeah. All right, so there you have it. 2 more games to go for the Warriors. I'm trying to get the equipment boys for a podcast in and around Christmas, so that'll probably be our next podcast there. Cody Hemans, Ryan Duck, and Josh Adams, we're trying to get them all on the same page so we can bring that up. Okay, this is why we're here tonight. I talked to this man at the arena Friday night. He was nice enough to come up to the press box, have a chat with us. He was part of the committee that picked the 50 all-time greats for the Stratford Culletons Warriors. Former Beacon Herald reporter, former managing editor of the Beacon Herald. I don't know, Jeff, I could go on and on with his resume, but we might be here for another half an hour if we do that. Newly elected board of directors for Hockey Canada, Mr. John Kastner.
Hey, guys.
John, how you doing? Good.
How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me on.
It's always a pleasure. We can make this work. We were going back and forth on when we can get him on, and we got it down, and I reached out to Jeff. I said, "Do you want in on this?" And he goes, "Yeah, I'm interested." So, all right, John, we've talked a bit about it. You started out, was it the late 70s? With
79.
79. Yep. So you were there for a lot of the big players that came through this city.
Yeah.
It was you and then Steve Rice and then Mike Savage, correct? That was pretty much the order that it went.
So people that covered the team, really, it was me in 79, and then I did it for a good long stretch. And then when I became the managing editor, it was Steve Rice, and then Mike Savage, and then Corey Smith. Really 4 guys in sort of 40 years, to be honest.
Yeah. Like I'm going to date myself here. I remember I was born in 74, so we got to 82 when Ed Olchuk showed up, and I remember we'd come home from school on a Friday, and we'd wait for the Beacon Herald just so we could read John Kastner's column on the Junior B team and what was going on, and then we'd go to the game that night. In the early 80s, they had some great players, but really that 82, 83 season, when they brought a 16-year-old Ed Olchuk to town.
Yeah.
That was the first time in my memory that I can remember them bringing a guy out, and we're all like, who is this 16-year-old?
Yeah. So I think that was a big story at the time. I remember Denny Flanagan, Denny Sr. was the general manager, and I did the usual thing. I went down to camp and I said, if you got some, who are going to be the good players here? I remember a couple directors saying, "Oh, there's nobody really good, but we're going to have a nice, really balanced team. I don't think there's any superstars." And I remember Denny going down to the bench and taking, telling the coach, and I think the coach was Dave Cressman, and he had taken over for Jack Nairn, I think. And he had told Denny or Denny had told him to take Olchuk off the ice in the third period. They had an exhibition game against Waterloo, and Toronto Marlboros had drafted Olchuk. And in a really late round, 15, 16 round, this is when Americans didn't get drafted. And Olchuk had 5 points in the first two periods. And the Marlies were there. Some other OHL teams were there. And it was pretty evident early on that Olchuk was going to be a really special player. It was really big news at the OHA level because they brought three Americans in. They brought Ed Olchuk, Mark LeVar, and Dan Quillis. And the team was the Chicago Young Americans. And it was a big deal with USA Hockey and also the OHA because that was not normal. You didn't see a lot of that where Americans came up to play Junior B or at that point the OHL. It was very unusual.
Yeah.
John, just a quick question.
Go ahead,
Sorry,
Jeff.
Just a quick question with that situation. You're saying the uniqueness of the opportunity that the three young players from Illinois came up. Can you just kind of maybe paint a picture for the listeners that aren't familiar? What was the reasoning that they went down there? I know that they were obviously recruiting and those obvious reasons, but I think about going all the way down to Illinois, and I'm wondering, would there not have been three players around this area within 150 to 200 miles that would be sufficient to be able to go on the same team that these three players took a roster spot for? If you can recall.
Yep. So there's a couple things about that. Olchuk and LeVar both ended up. They were really good. And I think that at that point, the really good players were all going to the OHL. And the players that were Junior B caliber they weren't as good as Olchuk and LeVar. Like to put it in perspective, Olchuk, finished the season at Stratford in April. The next year, he was on the U.S. Olympic team.
84.
Mark LeVar at Christmas time left for 3 weeks because he was on the U.S. team for the World Juniors, and he went in the National Hockey League draft. Like Olchuk, a year after finishing in Stratford, 14 months after being in Stratford, was the third player taken in the National Hockey League draft. Yeah. And it was, and the other two players were Marilyn Mew went first, Kirk Muller went second, and Ed Olchuk went third.
Jeez.
And the caliber of players that Denny was bringing in from the States, and other teams tried to catch up, but they didn't have the relationship with U.S. schools. They didn't have the relationship that, they didn't have the word of mouth where American kids were going home and saying, hey, this is a great place to play.
Yeah, that's some other Americans later on. I've talked to some and they said they were told, if you get a chance to play in Stratford, you go play in Stratford.
If you think about it now, and we think about the change between Junior B then and now, through the 80s, right through that decade, the number of National Hockey League draft picks that were on the team, not guys who got drafted afterwards, but guys who were drafted in the NHL draft, you think about that, and they were playing Junior B. I know you say, you'll look at a 16-year-old, 17-year-old, hey, he's going to go in the draft. He's going to the OHL. I bet he gets drafted. They had players that had been drafted. And like Nelson Emerson, he was a third-round pick to St. Louis. Gar Snow, he was a sixth-round pick to Quebec. Pat Murray returned after he was drafted. A guy named Mike Golden.
Was one of them
Golden was academically ineligible at Boston or at New Hampshire. He joined the Cullitons at Christmas time. He was taken in the second round of the NHL draft. He went between in the second round. He went between Bob Probert and Rick Tocchet, and he was an Edmonton Oilers pick that Barry Fraser had taken him. And he was academically ineligible. Came to Stratford. Ended up going to, I think, Boston, University of Maine the next year. So it was a pretty unique situation where you'd say, there must be players around here that were good. The real kicker there was Junior B teams were allowed 7 imports. Americans didn't count. Americans didn't count as imports. So they'd have your 7 imports, and then it might have 2 or 3 or 4 Americans who didn't qualify as imports.
So, John, at that time that you're talking about, the time frame with all these eligibilities and so on, was that a unique thing to the league that the Flanagans kind of brought to the fiber of the local junior B kind of talent pool? Like, were they the only ones doing it, or were there other teams doing that as well?
There was a few teams in Canada that were doing it, but they were the only Midwestern junior B team that was doing it. They were really bringing in really high quality Americans. Wexford Raiders, Wexford was doing it as well. Henry Carr Crusaders did it a little bit, but it was pretty unique. They had the monopoly on really good American players.
Wow.
Now that you brought up the Henry Carr Crusaders, there's a story I've heard you tell a few times. We talked about it, the Pat Kelly story.
Yeah, so that was Streetsville.
Streetsville story. Yep.
Yeah.
So after we talked about that in the 50th show, his son actually got a hold of me, Jim Kelly, who's for FM 96.
Oh, right.
And Pat told Jim that you were about 50% right from what he remembers.
Well, that's good. 50, considering I was in high school at the time, that was 50% is not bad, because that was my average in high school too.
All right. Can you? A lot of our listeners probably haven't heard that story. Can you go through that story again about Pat Kelly? I forget what year that was, but it's a very intriguing story.
So I think it was 75, 76, because I was in it might have been 76, 77, but they were playing Streetsville. They lost the first game. I think it was 9 or 10-0 in Stratford, and they sort of got bounced around pretty good. I think it was 77, 78, and they got bounced around pretty good. Streets was a big, tough team. A lot of teams in Toronto had what they called the Derby flu. They were the Streetsville Derbies. They're sponsored by Derby Dog Food. And, they had played Pickering, and, some teams like that wanted no part of it. They were rough and tumble and dirty, and, they were very, very intimidating. Fights in the warm-up, all sorts of stuff like that. And Stratford lost, I think it was 10-0 first game in Stratford Friday night. And Pat Kelly had been a really good player for Stratford the year before. He'd taken over his dad's construction company. He didn't play at all that year, maybe a game or two, maybe. I think I went and looked back on the stats. I think it was maybe a game or two. And he was building bridges. That's what the W.G. Kelly Construction did. And he was working in Kingston. And Denny got a hold of him and said, Pat, we could really use you. We've got a lot of really skilled players. Got guys like Jim Wilson, Paul Barton, Ross Yancey, really skilled players, but we could use some toughness. And he drove from Kingston to Streetsville, 2:00 game on a Sunday afternoon. They had a pair of skates for him. They had equipment for him. He got dressed out there, and he started the game. Jack Nairn started him at center ice, right across from a guy named Andrew Boyington. And Andrew Boyington was the toughest guy in Toronto. He had been in the American Hockey League, if you can imagine, as a fighter. Got cut at the deadline, went back and played Junior B. And Pat Kelly fought him at there was 20 minutes on the clock. At the 1959 mark, they fought right at center ice. And Pat Kelly won that fight handily. And then Stratford won the game. At the end of the game, guy jumped Pat Kelly. And then another guy jumped him. And I'll never forget this. Pat Kelly was fighting one guy, pulled the net down over top of him, threw the net down over top of the guy, and then fought a second guy. And the whole series changed. The smaller guys got tougher. The bigger guys got even tougher. And a lot of guys in Streetsville got a lot less tough in a hurry. And it's pretty remarkable. And the one thing I always say about Pat Kelly, who was a friend of mine, I grew up with him. One thing I'll say about Pat Kelly is you would be doing him a disservice to refer to him as just a fighter. He was a good player. He could score. He was responsible on the ice. a huge building, a building of a person. I played over the hill Huff and Puff hockey with him years later. Still played the same way, bit of a Tasmanian Devil type, Gary Roberts type, and so that was that went down into Stratford, that Stratford Culleton's folklore.
Yeah, that is folklore. That would be their first Sutherland Cup. The reason why I'm bringing this stuff up is because now we're at the end of the 50th anniversary for the Stratford Hockey Club Inc., who ended up buying the team in 75. So we're getting to the end of the year. Back to the Ed Olchuk year. There's a story about them running out of players in the playoffs?
Yeah, they had So there's two things about that 82-83 season. One, they were 500 at Christmas time. That was the one thing. They were not very good. And they went on an absolute tear from Christmas time to the end of the season, ran through the playoffs, a couple of great playoffs round. Of course, one of them with Waterloo, where they played just great. And I got to tell you, the Almonds had some great crowds and they've had some great runs. That, in my lifetime, there's never been a playoff run like that. And I don't know if it's because the team underachieved early. Like I said, they were 500 and Stratford had some real success. And all of a sudden, here's a team that's, not doing very well at Christmas time. Dave Cressman made a number of changes, including taking Mark LeVar, who had been a winger for Ed Olchuk, and putting him to run the power play. And he went and he played the point on the power play, and that changed everything. And Mark LeVar was a very highly skilled defenseman. But at the end of the year, they ran up against a Henry Carr team that was very good. And they had 6 or 7 guys going to U.S. college. And I don't think I've ever, in the 20-some years that I covered junior hockey, I don't think I've ever seen any team, not just a Stratford team, I don't think I've ever seen any team run out of players the way Stratford did. like half the team was injured. I remember, Tim Adair was hurt. Mark LeVar was hurt. Olchuk ended up playing defense. Here's a 16-year-old center who led the league in scoring as a center, and he's playing defense. But they had a great playoff run. Probably the best was the OHA semifinals against the London Diamonds. And they played at the old London Gardens, and they had the biggest crowd of the year that year in London was for a Stratford London game. And they had a great crowd. Craig Simpson was on that team. They had a guy named Steve Salter, who was a 20-year-old player, excellent player. He was on that team. Pete McLeod had come down from the London Knights. He was on St. Thomas team that they also had to get through. And I think they had about 4,000 people at the old London Gardens out by the 401 for that Stratford game. And then, of course, Stratford eliminated them on a double overtime game in at the Almond on a Friday night, where
the Mark Maui goal.
That's the Mark Maui goal with less than 5 seconds to go. Dave Cressman had called for a stick measurement. Guy named Brad Jansen had an illegal stick. He had been the shadow for Olchuk throughout the series. Olchuk won the puck right back to Maui. Maui put it in the top corner, and the goaltender was Craig Billington, another NHL guy. And he had, won the faceoff against Craig Simpson, put it over Craig Billington's shoulder. A lot of NHL names there, and the place that tied the game. Went into overtime. They didn't sell it. Went into double overtime, and Mark LeVar, who had left the game in the second period of the Charlie Horse, had changed, was out of his equipment, showered, was in street clothes. Between the first and second overtime, put his stuff back on, and then was on the ice and assisted on the game-winning goal in double overtime.
Jeez.
Hey, John, when you're talking about the injury-prone team that year, was that like a regular thing, like in the league itself, or was it a Stratford thing? Is it the way they played? What do you attain that to? Just a streak of bad luck, or with all the injuries that they had?
It was was a curious thing. Now, the one thing it was at that point, it was like the NHL playoffs. You had to play so many rounds. Like you would play 3 rounds to win your league. Then you would have to play either the Western, so the Golden Horseshoe champions would play the Metro champions, and then the Midwestern champions would play the Western Junior B champions. So London, Sarnia, St. Mary's, St. Thomas, you'd have to play them. And then you'd have to play the winner of the other series. So you had to play 5 rounds. And I think that was part of it. Now they played fewer games. They don't play 48, 50 games. I think they played 42 games. But it was just it was, a lot of those series are going 7 games. And it was so much, it was like, I often said, you have to play more games. You had to play more games to win the Southern Cup than you had to play to win the Stanley Cup.
Right.
I remember some of those games because we had to stand up on top of the seats at the top, hanging by the girders that went up just to see the ice because there were so many people at the Alman Arena for those games late in that playoff run.
I remember they had, and that was not uncommon. I remember, having to, I remember the press box being full. That there was live broadcasts from London, there was live broadcasts from Stratford, there'd be live broadcasts from other places. There's maybe two radio crews up in the press box, and I remember them putting ticket sales on Thursday night at 7:00, and the rink all being sold out at 20 after 8.
Because it used to be the games on Friday nights used to be at 8:00 up until whatever year that was, if I remember correctly.
I just said that to Les the other night. I said that, for the guys covering the games now, the games start at 7:30 and they're about a 2-hour and 20-minute game. It used to be the game started at 8 because of all the fights and everything. I'd be out of there. I'd be out of the press box 10 after 11. That sort of thing. Then you go down to the dressing room, talk to a couple people. I'd walk into the newsroom, which is where Mercer is now. I'd walk in there. It wasn't unusual for me to get in there 11:45 to start writing.
Yeah. Well, and I remember the 8:00 start because when I was 8 years old, we were the little Culletons in Rotary, and we played in between the first and second period. And my mom was a little upset because I was going to be up past my bedtime.
You're going to be up till 9:00.
The first and second, because you wouldn't get on the ice till, 8:45 or whatever. But, here I am 40 years later, and I remember it like it was yesterday. It was the full crowd, and, there was such a aura with that hockey club back in the day. You were a big part of that too. One thing I wanted to mention, John, was, through your career and following the team, you told the stories, and maybe you can share a little bit more, but talking about the tools that you created to help you do your job better, where you had the lists of the different arenas, where you could do your reporting for the scores, the goal scorers, the people that you would call to get your reporting so that you could have it ready for Saturday. Can you take us through that a little bit?
Yeah, so what we used to call, like with Steve Rice and I worked together the most, and we referred to the term in the newspaper is called agate, and that's the scoreboard page, and that's the scoring summaries. And we would get back there, we'd write our story, but we really wouldn't get writing because the first thing we did, we got in there, we'd start calling arenas. And there was a group of places that we would call. Canadian Press would distribute all the OHL scores, National Hockey League scores. That was all good, but we would have to go in and manually update them, on a computer. But to get the scores from Mitchell, New Hamburg, St. Mary's, St. Thomas, Sarnia, all the Western Junior B places, Elmira, Cambridge, I had the phone numbers. When I would go to a rink to cover a road game, I would say to somebody, who's the best number to call? So I know in Elmira, we called the number that was in the booth, like in the concession stand. And that's the sort of work we did. And then, Jeff, the really interesting thing is once there became real interest in U.S. colleges, and there was a lot of kids playing at U.S. College, and there was a lot of interest how Bowling Green did, how Michigan State did, how Michigan did. I ended up getting the numbers of those press boxes as well, and we would call them and say, how did Michigan State versus Bowling Green do tonight? Scott Rex was at Ohio State. How did they do? We had a bunch of guys at Northern Michigan, at Western Michigan. I remember my boss coming to me once, managing editor, and he said, "Why do we have all these calls to the United States? I mean, they're showing up on the phone bill, and they're 11:30 at night. Like, who's in the newsroom calling the United States at 11:30 at night?" And I said, "Well, honestly, I can believe it or not, I can explain that." But that was a part of our job, if you can imagine now, where compared to live streaming and, we can grab a phone and see who's on the ice, let alone what the score is.
Well, and you can watch any given game you'd like any day of the week. It's all at your fingertips now. But, just to give people just the full kind of story about all that, obviously this is before the internet. This is before any type of, reliable resource. You guys honestly went out and did that on your own to be, prolific and with the job you guys were doing, and you and Steve Rice. So, I mean, those are just such great stories, because it's, you don't want to use the word pioneer because that's not what it is, but it was definitely, you guys were a point of difference in that time for this area with this team.
And not to cast dispersions on, the print media now, or the radio media now, but I think that, I think that helped the crowds. There would be a story in the Beacon Herald, like I can tell you, we'd have an advance in the story in the Beacon Herald Friday. We'd have the game story on Saturday. We'd have a game story from Saturday and Sunday in Monday's paper. I usually had a column Tuesday about, what was new, what was happening around the league. And I think that really, in retrospect, I didn't think about it at the time, but I think that really probably helped the interest in the hockey club.
Hey, I have no doubt. I couldn't agree with you more, John.
Yeah, 100%. Like I said, we used to wait to get the Beacon Herald on Friday night, read the column, and then go down to the game. And then, obviously wait for Monday to see what happened throughout the week, unless we listen to it on the radio. You got to spend a lot of time up in the booth with two of the legends, Clark Heyman and Bob Smith.
Yep.
Up there. What were those guys like to deal with?
They were great. They became friends for sure. We would, quite often, like this time of year in particular, we'd quite often drive together. We'd, it would be snowy here, snowy there. I drive or they drive or something like that. Clark used to get me on, on between periods. That was a fairly, a couple times a month I'd be between periods. And Clark liked the idea of having me on because I was somebody who had talked to, a coach at Bowling Green. I talked to an OHL scout. I talked to this guy about who was going to get drafted where. And Clark didn't do as much as that. I often thought that at least Steve Rice and I, we tried to be really objective and, and by critical, I don't mean, negative, but we looked at the game critically. We looked at the game as to, what caused, what was the result of the win and stuff. Bob, and to a greater degree, Clark, they were really cheerleaders.
Yeah.
They were, at one point, Bob Smith was president of the hockey club and he was, calling the games. Don MacArthur, same. He was on the executive. He was calling the games. The print guys were never really like that, I didn't think. But yeah, I spent a lot of time with Bob and Clark, and most of it was good. Most of it was terrific. We were in competition with one another, and but it was respectful. And I thought when at the newspaper I brought a bit of that we were there was a bit of competition there, that we wanted to do a better job, get the stories first, and those sorts of things. I always joked about when Clark Heyman used to do his weekend update, he always had a copy of the Beacon Herald.
Hey, John, and just for listeners that maybe aren't familiar with those names, those are the legendary commentators on the radio, 1240 CJCS for many, many years. And it was always such a great job. We weren't down there every weekend, but you'd always listen to them on the radio in the family room with the fire going because they tell a great story. They painted the picture. And here's a question for you then: when you were that close to them, and you were, you had your critical angle, and I appreciate you saying that because that's how you create a little bit of whatever the Gunther there that you maybe want to get out of what you're writing. But did they ever approach you about you're not saying that on my radio or anything like that?
Well,
Was
the
it
other thing
pretty?
too that they're always upset about, I would like the in between periods, I would never let a scoop out over the radio. It was
Okay.
say, what about this? What about that? I'd say, well, you get tomorrow's paper. It's available in fine stores everywhere. GS News will have, if you want to know
35
more
cents.
about this story, drop down to GS News tomorrow afternoon or call the Beacon Herald and get a subscription.
Yeah.
Oh, that's classic. All right, John, moving on a little bit. The 85-86 Stratford team, which is, known as probably one of the best junior B teams ever. How did that year transpire? And
well, there was a lot. They had a lot of players back, and they had a lot of really good players. I think, when we talk about winning streaks now, like it comes up every year. Somebody will say, hey, there's a really good winning streak, or this team's on a record-breaking winning streak, or, those sorts of things. So that Culleton team lost 2 games in October on back-to-back games. So if you put it in perspective, they lost Sunday in Waterloo in October. Then they lost the next Friday night in Stratford. So they lost twice in 5 days. They didn't lose again until the last game of the regular season. And they had sat a whole bunch of guys in Waterloo, and they called up a whole bunch of young kids that played. John Uniac played, Tim Taylor played, Jay Bogdan played, all guys who were sort of 15, 16. And so if you think about that, they didn't first month, like October, they lost, and they didn't lose again until the very last game of the year. And that was in Waterloo. And I think they lost there 4-3, I think. The kicker for that was Warren Bullock and Nelson Emerson were both going for the scoring title, and Dennis Flanagan and Terry Uniac put them on the same line, fairness, to make sure they got the same amount of ice time. And I think they each got a couple of points or something. And I can't remember. They might have tied for the scoring title. But that team, I think one of my favorite anecdotes about that was, again, before the internet, they played Streetsville in the final. And I remember the coach from Streetsville calling, I called him up and did in advance a preview of this final. And I said, they had a great year. They'd beaten Pickering. Joe Neuendijk was a really good player for Pickering. They'd beaten them up, and they were anxious to get back at Stratford. And it wasn't that far removed from, that 77, 78, 79 period where Streetsville was half nuts. And then, you're only 6 or 7 years later, and you think, well, that was a long time ago now, but it wasn't that far removed. And they were maniacal too. And I remember Rick Tarasuk saying to me, it looks like by looking at the score sheet, I got a copy of their stats. We really have to control that one line that's got Nelson Emerson, Warren Bullock, and Sean Heafy. That seems they get all their production out of one line. All 3 guys had 50 goals. All 3 guys had 100 points. And we're going to have to shut down that line. And I remember saying to Rick Tarasuk, I said, well, those guys they're not on the same line. I said, those are the 3 centers. And I said, they don't play together. He goes,
He's third line. Yeah.
He goes, what? I said, they don't play together. I said, Bullock's on the second line and Sean Heafy's on the third line. I said, in fairness, they do play together on the power play. And I said, all 3 guys are out there on the power play. He goes, what? I said, yeah. And he said, well, that I've never, he didn't believe me. I talked to him after the first game. He goes, they are on different lines. I said, yeah, they are.
Hey,
They
John,
are
and
really
that,
balanced, and they were older. They had some
yeah,
young kids, but they had some older players too. I think they had 8 or 9 20-year-olds, and that team had I would think now I sound like an old guy, but sort of am one. If you think about somebody out of the Midwestern Junior B getting a scholarship, a Division I scholarship to the United States, that's a big deal. That team had 10. That
Jeez.
team had 10.
yeah. So, John, through that season, and it was obviously pretty obvious that they're destined to do good things in the playoffs. And that, how did you keep your approach fresh as a reporter? I mean, game in, game out, you've got 350 goal scorers, you've got 100-point scorers, you've got great goaltending, you've got solid defense. Walt Morris, Jeff St. Cyr, all those guys that were on that team. So, what would your approach be back then when you had to keep? Everybody wanted to see this keep rolling, but you probably had a different responsibility in trying to maybe still be a little bit critical. Is that fair?
Yeah, as much as we could. Steve Rice and I remember we talked about that, and we said, like, we were driving, we and a guy who'd worked at the radio station, who was the sports director, they named Scott Pettigrew. We were driving to a Blue Jays caravan event in February when they used to have these they'd bring 4 or 5 Blue Jays in, and you'd go to something in Kitchener, Toronto, and there'd be a lunch and a bun feed. You'd interview some guys and sort of drum up interest in the Blue Jays. And we were driving there, and Scott Pettigrew sort of brought it up. I remember he said, they're not going to lose again. I said, well, they can't lose again. He goes, no, look at the rest of the schedule. Look at who they play the rest of the year. Went through all the teams. They won't lose again. And I'm not sure it was great for the league. Like, for the other teams in the league, like parity's always really good. But we tried to find other stories. We tried to find Steve Rice and I went out of our way to look at personalities, to look at stories, to look at, where guys had come from, some of their background that, that was maybe more interesting. Warren Bullock had played against Stratford. He was from Kitchener. He'd gone to Toronto. They had something called the Miracle Mart tournament, where they had a tournament at Christmas time the year before, where each of the 5 leagues had put an all-star team in. He'd played against Stratford, played really well. Somebody saw him. Denny, of course, went and approached him about coming to Stratford. And, to really dig into some of those other stories, a really good player named Steve Nelson, who was in St. Mary's, a great, big, huge defenseman. He came over to Stratford at the deadline from St. Mary's for his 20th year. He was going to age out, and St. Mary's, Angie Nigro, said he'd been a good player for them. He should have an opportunity to play for Sutherland Cup, and we really delved into some of those other stories like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you had a good relationship with the Flanagans. How was Joan to deal with? Because everybody said she was really the mastermind behind those teams some years.
It was unbelievable. It was really astounding. Like if you ever you're in another rink, and the number of people, OHL scouts, NHL scouts, that would come up to Joan and ask her what she thought about players, either on Stratford or another team. And she would hold court. You would see her in the lobby, and there'd be 4 or 5 NHL guys like Wayne Maxner and Bert Templeton and Brian Kilray. They'd be standing talking to, Mark Hunter. They'd be standing talking to Joan, asking her questions about who was good. She had an unbelievable ability to identify talent and a great relationship builder. Like people would talk to her. She'd get their phone number. She'd get 5 other people's phone numbers. She'd give them to Denny, and they had a Rolodex that was unmatched. My favorite story about Joan was a guy named Brian O'Leary coached the Owen Sound Grays, the junior B team. And they had a kid there, a goaltender, local kid from Shallow Lake, just outside Owen Sound. And he was going to be their goalie. And they'd had Ryan McDonald. He was lined up to be their goalie for since he was 12. And he's playing up there as a 17-year-old. There's a midget championship in Shallow Lake. There'd been about 20 centimeters of snow that day. And the rink seats 400. There's 500 in the rink. The game starts at 8:45 on a Sunday night. And Brian O'Leary joked, he said that when he heard the 50-50 winner, they announced the 50-50 winner as Joan Flanagan from Stratford. And he turned to his assistant, goes, well, there goes our goalie. he said, if Joan Flanagan and Denny are up here tonight in this weather, they're here for a reason, and we got to start looking for another goalie next year. And Ryan McDonald came to Stratford, won the Sutherland Cup, ended up playing for the London Knights, was a really good goalie for them.
Yeah, it's those fable, legendary stories that, such a rich history here in Stratford. What other seasons really stand out to you during your time, either covering it or after, when you were the sports director after that, and the editor in chief?
Yeah, so I got to share one other about Joan, where they had gone up to Joan and Denny. I'd gone down to the arena to do a bit of a story, and I used to go down. I think they practiced Thursday nights, I think. And I went down there Thursday night, and Jenny was in the room, and Joan showed up. It was they got off the ice at 8:15. She's trying to get Denny going about 8:45. They go get in the car. I said, where are you guys going at this time of night? Well, we're going to Sault Ste. Marie. I said, not now. Yeah, we're going now. We're going to drive to Sault Ste. Marie. And there was some tournament. Great North Midget League had a tournament up there. And I remember Joan saying that she was talking to looking at the players, this kid, that kid, this kid's good, that kid's good, that sort of stuff. And somebody said to her, the best player isn't here. The team from Dryden won't use any minor midgets on their team. They have a policy. They only use major midgets. So they got a 15-year-old who's, I think, the best player. He's not on the team. But there's a high school tournament across town, and he's playing in that high school tournament. So they leave that tournament. They go across town, watch a high school tournament, and the player is Chris Pronger. Mm-hmm. And that's how they brought Chris Pronger in. And that was that sort of network of, relentless scouting. For lots of people dedicated time to it, but for them, it was a lifestyle. It's what they did.
Well, sorry, go ahead, John.
No, they didn't set aside time to, scout or whatever. It's what they used their vacation on. It's what they talked around the kitchen table. They would go to games instead of watching TV, and it was a lifestyle.
They eat, live, and breathe it. It wasn't an effort for them. That's just what they did, by the sounds of it.
Yep, very much so.
I like the way too, John, and you're noticing, and you're still around the area and stuff like that. But I think that's the important part of, as everything evolves and time passes, you see these local people that are, running Stratford, for instance, Nick Parr and Jason Clark and Dave Williams and Slit and Nux and all these guys. They saw all that. So when you see all that, and times change and the leagues change and all that type of stuff, but if you talk to a guy like Jason Clark, like I have, that's all instilled in what they want to do to carry on the quote unquote tradition of what Stratford's all about. And I think that's just a really great attribute to the Flanagan family, for sure.
Well, I think so too. Yeah, I think so too. That there's a standard set, and they're aware of it.
Yeah, very important.
Yeah, the scouting nowadays is, you can get a lot more games online, right? There's still I talked to Chase Windsor, the video coach. He does a lot of scouting for the team and for elite prospects, and he goes to a lot of tournaments still. But he said, really, he said, if I want to look at a player, I can just call up online and get everything that's available on that player. Back then, they didn't have that. They had to go see the person and it live.
Yeah.
That's a great Chris Pronger story, though, eh? The fact that
the other part about the Chris Pronger story was they really thought they'd get him back for another year. his brother was Sean Pronger, was at Bowling Green. They were pretty sure Chris was going to go to Bowling Green. He didn't go until the fourth round. Well, I think it's the third round of the OHL draft. He went to Peterborough. They convinced him to go there. And I remember talking to Denny, Denny Senior. And he said, well, it's really, we really hope to get him back. But, we've got Nelson Emerson's here. He got a kid who lives next door to Nelson who's pretty good. And we think he's, we hope we hope he can replace Chris Pronger. I said, replace Chris Pronger? He goes, yep. He said, I think he's going to be pretty good. It was Rob Blake.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
man.
with all these names you're dropping, and it's pretty incredible to think, and it's really, I think it's a really unique story of how a town the size of Stratford was really a hockey factory back in the day. It's not about everybody making the NHL, but it was, like you say, the NCAA Division One teams and drafted by the NHL. Life after the Stratford Culletons at the time. I mean, you saw them all come through. It must have been year after year. You kept on seeing these players being cultivated and harvested in Stratford. Like, what was the feeling like every year?
Jeff, I wish, I have one regret about it is that it was fleeting, that, all of a sudden, Stratford, I won't say they ever became like everybody else, but I think that those teams you saw so much talent, so many good players. Stratford was recruiting, toe to toe with OHL teams. They were recruiting Nelson Emerson was highly recruited. The Guelph Storm wanted Nelson Emerson. He came to Stratford instead. Brian Smolinski. I remember Brian Smolinski saying he had 115 offers, where to play junior hockey. He came here. I just think that for me, and I hopefully a lot of the fans that went, that they appreciated at the time what they were seeing. And I'm not sure I did, and I'm not sure how many other people did, to know that this incredible run is not going to last forever. I think everybody thought it would last forever, but the OHA brought in some rule changes. Hockey Canada brought in some rule changes. They limited the number of Americans that could play. The OHL became way better at recruiting. They became way better with their education packages. It really matched U.S. schools in many ways. And for me, I never thought of it as those days being really remarkable until they were over, which I think is too bad.
Well said.
Yeah.
Because Les and I have talked a few times on air, and we grew up in this town, and we're at a lot of the games that you were reporting on and stuff. And we talked about the parity in today's game in the Western Conference, especially in Junior B, and it's great. It's great for the game. It's great for the fans and all that. But it hasn't always been that way. And I said to Les, the last time I was on, I said it was good for us back in the day because we were always winning. Yeah. But it was the teams like Listowel that needed to improve, and Brantford and Owen Sound, and we would always take those players. And you're right, and it's so well said, John, about you don't really realize what you have until all of a sudden you're not in first place in February and you're the Stratford Culletons, right?
Yeah, and I think about like that. I think it was the 85-86 team. They went 56-4-1. So they lost 4 games all year with 1 tie. Oh, that's right. The last game of the year was the tie. The last regular season game was that was the one. So so they went 56-4. 2 of those losses were on back-to-back weekends, and 2 other ones were in the playoffs. And you just think, that's astounding. That Henry Carr team in 82-83, they didn't lose at all. They were undefeated that year, if you can imagine. I think it was 54-0 or something, including playoffs. Like, there wasn't a lot of it. Like, you go to the Almond on Friday night, both teams got a good chance to win.
Yeah. Well, I remember my first NHL game really, really quickly, and I think I was in at about 6 or 7 years old, and it was Nelson Emerson was on the team. They beat Cambridge. Their home game was on a 2 o'clock on a Sunday for some reason, and this was way back. And they beat Cambridge 16-0. And I remember Nelson Emerson crossing the center red line, taking a slap shot, missed the net. It hit the boards. The goalie literally put in all his effort to go like kind of stop it, and it hit the boards, and he couldn't react fast enough to stop the shot. And here I am again, 40 years later, and I'll never forget like those little instances that I saw in that game. Like it was silly.
Yeah, it really was, and it was great if you're in Stratford. It was if
100%.
you're a great fan of the Cullens. If you're trying to build a team in Listowel or trying to build a team in Cambridge or place like that, it was tough sledding. I remember I think it was a guy in Cambridge, a guy named George Barrett, I think, or Barnett. He was the general manager, and I remember doing an interview with him. He said, "They don't belong in this league. I don't know why they're here. Like this is they need to be in a different league." And that caused a great uproar.
Yeah.
Well, he said,
yeah, I just tell people, I said we're so spoiled as young kids with the players that came through this. And John, so as John reconnects, Jeff, such great stories from him. It's fabulous to see.
well, it's good that I was really really thankful when you gave me a text there last week in reference to the opportunity tonight, because as anybody who knows John, he's a fountain of knowledge, experience, credentials, portfolio, and hopefully we're going to be able to get him back on here. But I wanted to thank you especially for having me on with him, because if you know Stratford sports, Beacon Heralds, the roles that he's had, just a really special individual. I would encourage him to write a book, because the stories he has and the experiences and all the above, it's endless.
Yeah, it's just been great. Like when I talked to him Saturday night, I said I need to get you on the podcast because your story, so involved in hockey, not just in Stratford, but all across the country now.
Yeah.
And I hope to get him back because he's got some really good stuff to talk about there as well. We're just going to take a little bit of a break and we'll be right back.
You'll have to go back to kind of where you started with that explanation there about the PWHL there, if that's okay.
Yeah, what, like we call it the Junior C League at the time, and it was just
Oh. Yeah, we're having connection issues again, John. All right, here we are back. We had a little technical issues there. You guys might not see a lot of it because I'll be able to edit most of it out. Our guest, John Kastner, has been with us. And John, you're up at your cottage.
Yep.
You spend a lot of your time up there now.
Yep.
But you're still heavily involved in the game.
Yeah.
So you finished, you were with the Ontario Hockey Federation for a number of years.
Yep. Yeah.
What were you?
So really what happened was I was with when I became the managing editor, I got out of the sports department in 2001. I'd had a great relationship with the Ontario Hockey Association, the OHA, particularly Brent Lads. And I went and joined the board of the OHA, and I stayed there until Brent left. And I'm not sure when it was Brent left. I think it was maybe 12, 13, maybe. And then I got out of hockey, and I was quite content with that. And I was at an OHF hospitality room my last year, and somebody convinced me to run for the OHF board. So I spent 10 years, 12 years with the OHF. And then this year I was chair, ended up being chair. And then this July, at a Hockey Canada meeting, I said, you know what, I'm good here and my term is up and I'm going to leave. I'm I'm gonna finish up the Ontario Hockey Federation. I'm just gonna get out of hockey. So between the OHA and the OHF, I'd spent sort of 20 years, 20 years in the game, maybe 22, 23.
Yeah, so you're still in it, and then so this year we talked about it. You are now part of the board of directors for Hockey Canada, and the story.
Yeah.
It's interesting the story you told me how that came about and
Yeah.
kept you in the game, eh?
Yeah, I said it's like that. I think it's Godfather 3 where Robert De Niro says every time I start to get out of the game, every time I get out of it, they somehow pull me back in. And I thought that was like that Michael Corleone, Robert De Niro character. we were at a bar. I'm not afraid to say that. We were at a bar in Montreal, and some of my counterparts, guys from other provinces and women from other provinces, sort of said, like, what's the deal? I said, you know what, it's time for somebody else at the OHF. There's a really good person waiting in the wings. Succession's a really big part of your responsibility. And you know what, I'm good. And I sort of stepped aside, and I didn't get out of Montreal without a number of people saying, well, let's really think about you running for the Hockey Canada board. You really should. And I said, geez, I don't know. That's pretty heady stuff. And anyways, a guy from Newfoundland, my counterpart woman from British Columbia, guy from Alberta, Jocelyn Thibault, who you might remember, he was from Hockey Quebec. Those people all sort of reached out and said, you could really help this organization at this point in its history. And Jonathan Goldblum, who was the chair, he came to Stratford. We went to Revel. We talked about hockey at Revel. We talked about Hockey Canada there. Colin Schmidt came by. We talked to him about, hockey and junior hockey and the challenges. And it was about my name for it. And geez, lo and behold, surprise, surprise, I ended up getting elected about 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, so you started a term with Hockey Canada. You're sort of coming in, like we talked a little bit. You're coming in after the little, I'm going to say, controversy that happened a few years ago.
Big crisis, yeah, for sure.
Big crisis in Canada, trying to get this game back. How do you see the game in Canada right now?
Well, I think the one thing is, I think that a crisis is, I'm not sure who said it. I think it might be Winston Churchill, but he said a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. And, I think that the crisis of 2022, and I was integrally involved in that because I was chair of the Ontario Hockey Federation. We made the motion to remove the board. I sat on the nominating committee that brought in the first new board. After it got stabilized, not the interim board, but the next board. And we had a really different view of governance and, what a board member should be, what their skill set should be, etc. So I was really part of that. But I think it's caused Hockey Canada to do some, sober reflection on what it is they did, how they operated, who our customer was, what the important thing was. I said many a times, the vast majority of players in Hockey Canada, the only draft they're worried about is if somebody's left the dressing room door open and it's minus 15 out. That's the only draft they care about. I remember talking to John Nader, who we know as our MP, and I said, like, when they had pulled funding, and I was with the OHF at the time, I said, so all that's done really is made hockey expensive for kids who had nothing to do with this. I said, the one thing you got to remember, John, is, and he was pretty receptive to it, and he said, I had no idea. I said, out of the now 660,000 registrants with Hockey Canada, I said, over half of those registrants are grade 8 or younger. Over half of those are playing house league hockey. And this year, out of that 660,000, you've got 118,000 girls. I think the layperson, maybe not us, but the layperson, when they think about Hockey Canada, think about the World Junior team, they think about the Olympic team, they think about that really high level stuff. But really, that's really makes up, 0.1% of the players that are involved in Hockey Canada. Obviously, the most high profile, high visibility. but there's really an appetite now and understanding that you have to look at those other players and make sure they're looked after, that they've got a good experience, that hockey is very meaningful for them. And I think whether that happened organically or by design, there's really emphasis on trying to make sure the player who's not elite, the recreational player, that it's a really positive experience for him. And ideally, some clown like me, who's at age 68, still on the ice twice a week and has a lifelong relationship with the game. To me, that's success.
Excellent.
I want to see the World Junior team do well. I want to see the Olympic team do well. But the number of kids I run into, I coached in Rotary Hockey and House League, who said, "Oh, do you remember that game? Do you remember this game? Do you ever see that guy?" To me, and now they're coaching their own kid, or they're an executive with Rotary Hockey, or they're a convener. To me, that's success.
Yeah. Well said, John. I just wanted to congratulate you on your new position with the board that you're on. It's not by chance that you're there. I think that your portfolio, your resume, and your hard work over the years and alertness to everything really has put you in a position to have this opportunity. So congrats to you.
Thanks very much.
I like the way that you approach the things that we're asking about. And what I mean by that is, what, to not waste a crisis is a really interesting point of view, because I think it's how we learn and grow and progress and all the great things that happen. And I really think that it's time where we see someone like yourself and maybe some other newly elected people on the board are going to be able to maybe effectively change the culture that maybe we're familiar with and maybe a little bit too comfortable with. And
yeah, for sure. We brought forward a myriad of changes, and by we, I mean the collectively, the 13 branches, as well as Hockey Canada. Over the past, since 2022, there's been an incredible number of changes took place to structure, to culture, to rules, to policies, all of which would have been very difficult to pass, prior to the crisis. I mean, there's many things that have been debated and passed that your partner would lean over to you and say, "Hey, we never would have had this discussion 10 years ago. We never would have talked about electing the people to the board that we've elected, that we elected, in the past number of years." So the crisis was no fun, for sure. I was working at the time. I was working at the museum, and I, for a sort of 4 or 5 week period, I'm text messages at 6 a.m., text messages at 1 o'clock in the morning. And it was, there was a lot of angst, and a lot of people who you'd known for a long time were removed from the game for forever. And that was unfortunate, sad, inevitable, but it really resulted in a resolve to change the game. I sat on a committee for a couple of years in a row called the Beyond the Boards Committee. We talked about how do you change dressing rooms? Like what's acceptable? What isn't acceptable? How did it become acceptable? How do we turn around that there are certain things you don't do? I think the next big discussion is going to be over people involved in the game at the administrative level, coaches, general managers, people like that who somehow, we know they shouldn't be in the game. And, there's a way to, set some standards to say that, that's just not all right. And it's not acceptable. There's not many of them anymore, Jeff, to be honest, but they can go to other sports as well. They can leave hockey. They show up in baseball. They show up in soccer. I think we've got a leadership responsibility there to make sure that doesn't happen. So we've really moved to a different stage of making the game, I think the best word is safe, that it's safe for every kid feels comfortable. Every kid feels safe.
Well, it's that too, John. And I'm sure that you've, in your new role, it's not like you're going to have suggestions and answers overnight. But, you think about the safety of the fans, you think about the parents, you think about the challenges slash problems that aren't even on the ice in a lot of minor league games when you're in any given arena on any given day. And, I hear them in my career, what I do day to day. And, it's a whole lot of stuff that needs to happen. But I like the way you're approaching it with kind of, let's start with what truly needs to be looked at. And
Well,
then
yeah, I think that's right. And I think we've often talked about, an organization this big, where do you start?
Exactly.
Where do you start? And something I've said to minor hockey banquets, to minor hockey associations, whether it's at an OMHA meeting or an alliance meeting, or, I gave the same talk at a GTHL meeting. I said, where do we start to change the culture of hockey? And when I go to a rink, a lot of the problems in the game, in the arena, and I go to rinks a lot, a lot of the problems, the people who are problems, they don't have a lot to do with Hockey Canada. Their parents, their grandparents, their agents, their advisors, they're people that are sort of with a little bit outside of our realm of influence, a realm of control. So I often said that, where do we start? Where do you start to change? And I say, you don't start somewhere, you start everywhere. And I'll say I remember I was at the GTHL banquet last year, and I said, so how we deal with each other at this annual meeting is how we can set a standard for how parents deal with each other at the rink, how coaches deal with kids, how coaches deal with parents, how coaches deal with officials, how kids deal with their trainer, how kids deal with the officials. If we can set a standard here that there's a level of decorum in hockey that's really absent in general society. I think for people our age, we've seen the way how people deal with each other in line at Tim Hortons, on the 401, at the airport. And I think hockey has the opportunity to say, it's a Canadian game, and we're going to deal with each other like Canadians. We're going to be polite. We're going to be understanding. We're going to be receptive to other ideas. And whatever the outcome is, whether we disagree, it's respectful, it's courteous, and it's solution-oriented. I was in a rink a couple of weeks ago, and, up in a small town in the lobby, and people were complaining about the goaltender. And they said, goalie's this, goalie's that, Terry's terrible, we can't win with him. I said, hey, you better be happy you have him, because lots of teams and towns this size don't, this age group doesn't have a goalie. Yeah. And you might want to address this differently. That thank goodness he's here. And there's a bit of a pause there. And I said, without him, one of your kids is going to play net? Yeah. And I said, are you going to go to a different town and play net? Are you going to get a goalie from another town? So I think, Jeff, really the thing is, and I've sort of wear the expression out, to change the culture, you don't start somewhere, you start everywhere. And I try, I end up in some combative situations for sure, but that's always somebody whispering in my ear, the little, great kazoo on my shoulder, whispering in my ear, say, we're trying to change the culture here.
Yeah. Well said, John.
Yeah. Something I've noticed being back in the rinks with the Twins, is now the younger officials are wearing green armbands.
Yeah.
When they're starting out, that is a great thing. It sort of makes everybody stop and pause and say, hey, this kid's just starting to learn, and you need the officials to play the game.
You absolutely need them. And there's places that lose them. Like there's places that lose their hockey or hockey programs. We do not have officials.
Les, what's the green armband for? I actually don't know.
So they wear a green armband. They wear a green armband, so they're a new official.
Perfect. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's an initiative that the Northern Ontario Hockey Association did, was part of the OHF, and they had a real shortage of officials. They've got a smaller population base, and one of the feedback they got was these kids are taking, they had an inordinate number of kids who did it 1 or 2 years and said, I'm not doing that anymore. So they came up with these green armbands for first-year officials. And the idea is, and there's no extra penalty, but there's an absolute stigma, a social stigma right away, that if you're giving one of those kids a hard time, that's seen as problematic.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. I didn't know about that.
Yeah.
Very good. Very good.
I was talking to my dad today, and I said you were going to be on, and you're part of Hockey Canada, but you're probably not in on this one. He wants to know what you think about the ice surface in Turin.
Isn't it amazing? It's just amazing that. So I've talked to a couple of different people. It would be like, no offense, but how does this happen? How does this happen? You've got satellites. You've got satellites that get to the moon. I often think of that movie Hidden Figures, where that woman's figuring out the numbers down to the 16th decimal so they can, entry point and those sorts of things. I just think about things like that. I guess, as I understand it, the NHL provided them dimensions in feet. They work in meters. They transferred from feet to meters. They rounded down, and somewhere along the line, it got transferred to yards. And so I understand, which is, I hope that story is not true, but it is astounding.
Yeah. Because we've been talking about it, and I think the best thing I heard was, well, when you get Canada and the USA on the ice, it doesn't matter how big or how small the rink is.
Right.
You're going to get one heck of a hockey game.
Yes.
I'm sure all of you guys have seen the USA hockey commercial that they put out. It's the Olympics with the NHL, John, back in the Olympics. I think it's a good thing for the game.
It's fantastic. I mean, I just saw a thing the other day about, people talking about the history of the, Miracle on Ice, all that stuff. And for some reason that's in the news again.
Yep.
They're talking about, reunion of those players. To me, as a Canadian, I was dismissive of it at the time. I'm dismissive of it now, in fairness. I mean, if it's not best on best, what is it? It's we talk about the battle of the bands. Well, it's a battle of the backup bands.
And John, now that you've had it, now that you've seen it in 2002, 4, 10, all these years that you've seen it, you can't go back now. I mean, we've got a 29-year-old Connor McDavid in his first Olympics, which is incredible to think about.
Yeah, I think about Vancouver. I think about the game Vancouver 2010. I think about the absolute euphoria that took place in Salt Lake City. And the one thing we talk about those games is it was incredible hockey.
Yeah.
Like I think about Salt Lake City and some of the high skilled plays. Paul, that pass, it was Steve Eisman.
Yep.
Through, Lemieux let it go through his skates to Paul Kariya right on the tape. That sort of hockey. I mean, once you get that, you've got, pretty fine scotch. To go back to Ryan Mountain Dew after that is, a bit of a tough sell.
Yeah. So I wasn't alive for 72 Summit Series. So really, the first Canada best on best was the 87 is what I remember most in Hamilton, just because it was so close. And that was one heck of a hockey series. Yeah,
I was in the press box for that.
Jeez.
Yeah, I was in the press box for that. Craig Hartsburg played in it. And that was peak Oilers. Like a lot of the players were peak Oilers. You had Lemieux in that. That was absolutely fantastic hockey.
Yeah. John, can you just quickly say to us or explain to us how or why you're in the press box? It's a pretty big deal. It's a pretty big deal, let's be honest.
Yeah, so I was just, so you can apply for press credentials, and I applied for press credentials for all sorts of stuff. and sometimes they asked you why, sometimes you didn't. But my rationale there said, why would you like to cover this game? I said, well, it's Craig Hartford from Stratford. I'd like to do a local angle with Craig Hartsburg. And then so I would get press credentials to go to that. I went to, I was thinking, sort of a couple months ago there, I went to a lot of World Series games, American League Championship games. I went to World Series games in other places. I really took advantage of the press credentials. Whenever those applications came across, I'd fill them out right away. And I went to the Rose Bowl one year.
But I think the nice thing about that too, John, is yes, you use those credentials, but you actually came back and really gave a lot of merit to the newspaper you were working for. And you really use that to your advantage of just improving your career too, like with what you're doing. And you may have saw a game or two and you done what you want with it, but
yeah, for sure. And I think for me, it was, and I really enjoyed it. I went to a lot of NCAA things, went to the Memorial Cup. But the Canada Cup, particularly like that game in Hamilton might have been, one of the absolute apexes of a sporting event I'd ever been at. That was such the level of skill, the level of intensity, and the pace, the breakneck pace of that game from start to finish. I remember that to this day. My takeaway from there is talk to Craig Hartsburg in the dressing room. Talk to him. The last guy to leave the dressing room, the player was Wayne Gretzky, and he sat there until every last guy, including schmucks like me from small town daily newspapers, were done talking to him, and then he got up and showered after the last guy left.
wow.
That's an awesome story. So this year's the 50th anniversary of the World Juniors coming up, and as Canadian, we've always thought of that as our tournament, but a lot of these other countries, they're into it. It's not just Canada's tournament anymore.
It's funny you should say that, Les. Like in some ways, I think about it. In some ways, it really is sort of Canada's tournament. I was watching a sports show the other day, and I think it said that 7 or 8 of the Slovakian players play in the CHL.
Yeah.
That 13 of the Americans play in Canada. Every year I see a goalie who will beat us, who's from the Kitchener Rangers, or he's from the London Knights, or he's from Medicine Hat or something. Like we've got to find a way. We want those leagues to be the best leagues. We want our players to play against the best players, but so many of those players are developing, being coached by us, being coached in our environment, benefiting from playing our players. And to me, I find part of me thinks that's problematic, but then again, my mother was British, and she talked about how English football was the same way. That English football now is better than it ever was because all the best players in the world, wherever they're from, they play in England. And people in Manchester, or somebody a fan for Arsenal or Leicester City, they're seeing fantastic players from around the world. So if you look at it objectively, it's a pretty cool thing.
I never thought of it that way till you said that. It really is a Canadian tournament.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more there. That's such a great perspective on the culture of the game in the CHL. May it be like you say, John, in Medicine Hat or Red Deer, or wherever you want to talk about. It's influential the way we play it. And here
absolutely.
They are, right?
And it's seen as the best. It's seen globally as one of the best development models, particularly for the junior player. The older player who's in U.S. college now, the 20, 21-year-old. But for those kids who are in that tournament, 16, 17, 18, there's a lot of kids in that tournament who, after the games, you see them in the hotel lobby. You see them at the rink. You see them, stand chatting. You say, how would those guys know each other? I remember I was in Ottawa last year, and the coach for Slovakia was was on the elevator, and Canada lost to Slovakia, and had a nice chat with him riding up the elevator. And I said, "Jesus, speak great English." He said, "Well, I coach in the CHL." He said,
Yeah.
"I coach over here." So.
Yeah. You talked about the 116,000 girls now or women in hockey in Canada. The other day, Hockey Canada released their blueprint going forward. Can you talk a little bit about that? I read up on it a little bit, but
Sure.
can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, again, coming out of 2022, there's some strategic, a lot of strategic thinking as to, what do we do well, what could we do better, and how can we grow the game. If you think about, 50% of the population of Canada is female, and we've got 660,000 players in Hockey Canada and 118,000 of them. So sort of, 1/6 of them, 1/6 of them are girls. There's a real area for a real potential for growth there. And what can we do differently to ensure that, that it's a positive experience for girls? They've got every opportunity to play. They've got as many opportunities to play on as many teams as boys do. Girls that get cut from a team in Stratford have got a place to go somewhere else. That they're getting right ice time. That they're not practicing at 7 a.m. before school. They're not playing the games at 10 o'clock at night. There are solutions to this. There are solutions that that this committee headed up by Jillian Apps has looked at for over a year. We're obligated, as the Hockey Canada really doesn't provide hockey. What it does, it creates a landscape where hockey can thrive. And I think that women and girls blueprint, called Rise as One, has a lot of good things in it for girls, and by extension, a lot of good things in it for families. If there's a girl and a boy in your house, and they're sitting at the kitchen table, the girl's experience should be as robust and as enjoyable and as reasonable and as convenient as her brother's. And I think that's one of the earmarks of this. And it's a noble project, and I think I'm not going to say it's overdue, because it was identified just a couple of years ago, and here we are with a really transformational document.
The surgence of the PWHL has really helped grow the girls hockey game here in Canada.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's given a kid who, it's given a 14-year-old girl say, what am I going to do? I'm going to play at a Canadian university, and that'd be great. Get an education. And that's true.
Yeah.
And I can maybe get to an NCAA school and play there, and that experience will be great. And that's true. But after that's over, what's next for me? Now there's a next for me. Now there's something for them after that.
Yeah. Your counterpart, Corey Smith, just did an article. He talked to Allie McLeod of Stratford, and she's playing over in Moto, and her thoughts maybe, after this year, does she come back and maybe play professional hockey in North America? Because the chance is there now.
It's perfect. Yeah. Absolutely. And that's, and there's some real solutions. My counterpart, when I was with the OHF, he talked about, some things he did in Saskatchewan that had, really good ideas. He said, we would, because their trips are longer, we had our ice schedulers and our schedulers, the boys and girls schedule, they'd sit at the same table. And he said, we would really work hard to, get, synergies there. So if you're in Swift Current, you're driving 3 hours. Well, let's have the boys team and the girls team, ride on the same bus and either play one right after each other or play on adjoining rinks. Like, let's get organized on this to cut costs and,
100%.
And now all of a sudden, that's the other thing that this blueprint has done is, what are some of the best practices that we can do? Are girls best served playing with other girls? Like the really highly competitive girls, are they best playing with other girls? Or should they play with boys? Well, we're not sure, but we do know they should have the opportunity to do so. there's an inordinate number of girls or women in the PWHL. A surprising number played on boys teams a little bit later, a little bit longer, and so there's some anecdotal evidence, even more than anecdotal, to suggest that that's a good environment as well. So we've got to make that easier to happen.
We had the conversation. I'm gonna jump away for something. We had a conversation about the Matthews Arena in Boston. We were talking about that. The oldest rink in North America in continuous use, but they had their final game there the other night. And so that really falls onto Stratford or Cambridge now. The Cambridge rink was built sooner.
Yep, 2 years.
The Almond Arena came in 2 years after, but we've never, at the Almond Arena, they have never stopped any time for a full year and not played hockey in that rink.
That's correct. So the closest was just before Hockey Day, when they did a $5 million reno at the Almond Arena, and the renovation started the day after the Cullitons were eliminated, which was April the 24th. They took the ice out the next day. They did those renovations, and the Cullitons and all minor hockey played at the brand new Rotary Complex until the 10th of December. And so there's never been a full season, even during COVID, that there was no hockey at the Almond. So you can make a case. It's the longest continuously operating arena in the world. There was a bit of a respite in Galt for 2 years, where they closed the arena right down for 2 years. Did a fantastic renovation, by the way. It is a beautiful arena.
Yeah.
But yeah, them's the math.
Yeah.
And you can land on whatever side of that dime you like.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Sorry, I know knowing me, as long as I have less, your adamacy toward, who's what, where, and I get it's fun to have the conversation.
Yeah.
I think at this point, with another chapter closed, with another arena, I just to be able to continue to celebrate these arenas of their kind, I guess you could call them, John. Would you agree?
Yeah, the arena of a certain period for sure, arena of a certain caliber for sure, and I think both municipalities should be embraced. Stratford and Galt, for having the wisdom to say, we have something special here. It might be cheaper, it might be more efficient to tear this building down and build a brand new, very efficient arena with bigger dressing rooms and wider stairs and all those things. But kudos to both those communities for saying, we have something here worth saving. Yeah, the bones were obviously good, and let's do what we can with these two arenas.
Well, and I'm glad, especially with the Almond too, because let's face it, it's probably the most expensive real estate in the town, and the city's holding up their end of the deal. So
yeah, I was very concerned when the Tom Patterson Theater. I was concerned what was going to happen. What was going to happen to the Almond Arena, and I remember going to a public meeting when I was on the Rotary Complex Committee, and there was a number of city councilors said, "Hey, the Almond, it's done. We need to embrace this new arena. Let's mothball the Almond Arena." And I said, I was chair of that committee. I said, if us getting the Rotary Complex moving forward has anything to do with the departure of the Almond Arena, I want no part of this. I'll fight this tooth and nail.
Thank you for that, John. Yeah, thank you.
I was assured the Almond was going to be safe, and then actually at the same time that they launched the RFP, etc., to spend $21 million on the Rotary Complex, that they at the same council meeting they passed a motion to spend $5 million on the Almond Arena.
Thank you for your work.
Yeah. A little Easter egg with the Galt Arena. There's a mural in the Galt Arena. The Coca-Cola sponsored it years ago.
Yeah.
A little Easter egg. Joan and Denny Flanagan are part of the fans. They're up in the top left or top right corner. Of that mural.
Yeah, they're tucked in there. And the person who was behind that was a Stratford guy. Bill Pickering worked for Coke. and he got Joni and he got Denny and Joan into that mural, and he's tucked into it too. You can find him in there as well.
Oh, Bill.
Bill Pickering, yeah.
Oh, good. That's awesome.
A little Easter egg there.
Yeah.
I always tell people we don't know how lucky we are with what we have in Stratford with the Almond Arena. When you travel to some of these other rinks, and it's just a great place to watch hockey.
I've been to lots of meetings and tournaments and the Royal Bank Cup and Hockey Day in Canada when it was in Nelson, BC, and all these different places. And, you'll be at the Legion or some reception and somebody say, hey, where are you from? Stratford. And you'd be surprised. And other people, oh my God, what a great rink. I go, what? What a great rink. I was at Nelson, BC, and a guy says, oh, I got to tell you my story about the Almond Arena. I said, how would you have a story about the Almond Arena? He goes, I was at the University of Guelph. A guy on my floor was playing junior B. We had some guys hurt. Asked me if I'd sign up and play junior B for Guelph. He said, I did. He said, I go there, I get in the penalty box, and some guy is yelling at me by name. He said, where I played junior B out in Western Canada, he said, we had no fans. He said, there's people in my own rink didn't know my name. I go to Stratford and they boo me. Hey Johnson, you're a goof and all this stuff. He said, he says, it was absolutely unbelievable. He said, I stepped out on the ice and went, what is happening? There's 1,000 people here.
You just happened to meet that guy in Nelson, BC.
Yeah, that in Nelson, BC. In the Legion in Nelson, BC. I run into a guy the Almond.
When I was talking to John Saturday, I said we were talking about Reese Brown, Stratford Warrior, who just played his 150th game there Sunday for the Warriors, which in this day and age is a great accomplishment in Junior B. I was able to interview Travis Hofstadler, who holds the record for Stratford with 232 regular season games. The caveat to that is he played for 6 years with the Coltons because he started when he was 14 years old.
Wow. Yeah.
You can't do that anymore.
You can't play as a 15-year-old, let alone as a 14-year-old. And I think doesn't the GOHL have a limit on the number of 20-year-olds?
Yep. There's a limit on number 20-year-olds and number 16-year-olds you can carry.
Yeah.
I remember Tom came in when he was 14, just before his 15th birthday when he played for Cambridge.
Yep.
And, there was another speculation there of, do they need to change the rules or not? Or wild.
Yeah.
Because I said to him, I said, well, we did the 50th all time, and John was on the committee, and Jeff was helped to reveal it. And I said to Travis, I said, you were on the bubble. And he said, I don't know. I said, I shouldn't have been on the bubble because I played on 2 Sutherland Cup teams, and I wasn't the top 50 player on those 2 teams. Because Travis Hofstadler was a big boy, and he said, I was always told glassing out. He said, the small ice surface in Stratford was built for a guy like him because he wasn't the fleetest of foot.
Right.
By the end of his stay with Travis, he was quarterback in the power play. So great career.
Yep, captain and quarterback in the power play in Junior B.
Yeah, great career.
6 years, I said. So you're the only platinum boy you will ever have in Stratford. A 5-year guy, they call him the Golden Boys. So
yeah.
John, I want to thank you for doing this. Jeff, I want to thank you for co-hosting. This has been fabulous. I just put on Facebook that we were having an epic guest, and Jeff was going to co-host. His phone blew up. My phone blew up. So when it gets released tomorrow and everybody finds out it's you, John, they're going to be quite surprised and happy because everything you've been able to talk about here tonight is some of the stuff we've heard and some of the stuff we've never heard. You have so much knowledge in this game.
Well, guys, an absolute pleasure. I appreciate, snowy Monday night in Ontario in December. There's nothing better than this conversation. This goes both ways. I've got a level of appreciation for your interest in this, and this was absolutely enjoyable. I never met a microphone I didn't like, and this was a great topic. Thanks a lot.
And John, just really quickly, I just wanted to congratulate you again on your new position on the board that you've just accepted the position with, and just your outlook, your knowledge, and all these great attributes that you bring to the table. I look forward to your journey, hearing about it, and just really wanted to thank you for your time. Yeah,
Thanks,
it's been great
guys.
to chat.
All right. Have a good night, folks. We'll probably be back maybe after the the 25 schedule for the Warriors is over, or in the new year. We'll let you know. For myself, Jeff, and John Kastner, thank you again, guys. Everybody have a good night.
Thanks so much.